Agnes Moorehead as Endora. Agnes Moorehead ignited the screen as Endora, the imperious aristocratic witch mother-in-law, dazzling in flamboyant fashion and armed with razor-sharp dialogue. Rising to prominence with the timeless classic Citizen Kane, 1941, she established herself as a true master of dramatic craft, commanding attention every time she appeared. In the public imagination, Agnes embodied elegance itself, a formidable presence whose individuality could never be mistaken amid Hollywood's constellation of stars. Yet the real life of the woman behind Endora was a relentless attempt to fill profound emotional voids. She was raised under the iron discipline of a strict minister's household, where personal feelings were suffocated into silence. That loneliness followed her into 2 failed marriages, to John Griffith Lee and Robert Gist, leaving behind a devout woman who nevertheless felt perpetually estranged within her own home. Bitterly ironic, despite achieving global fame, Agnes often felt diminished by spending 8 consecutive years draped in Endora's flamboyant costumes, an experience she regarded as a betrayal of the classical theatrical ideals she had devoted her life to honoring. The cruelty of fate reached its apex with a fateful decision in 1956 when she joined the film The Conqueror. Shooting in the Utah desert, perilously close to a government nuclear testing site, unknowingly signed a death warrant for Agnes and 220 members of the cast and crew. Toxic radiation silently invaded her body, only to erupt in early 1974 as aggressive, metastatic uterine cancer. Agnes chose to endure the searing pain in absolute silence at the Mayo Clinic, resolutely refusing public sympathy to preserve the last fragments of her pride. Within mere months, the image of a commanding queen on screen was replaced by a frail, ravaged body worn down by relentless illness. The contrast between an Endora who could summon storms and an Agnes Moorehead lying alone, powerless, awaiting death in the shadows of a hospital room, is a haunting truth that lingers long after the curtain falls. On April 30th, 1974, Agnes Moorehead passed away at the age of 73, closing a life spun with pride, brilliance, and unspoken sorrow. She left no heirs behind, only a vast emptiness across the artistic firmament. Yet her passion and indomitable spirit endure, an immortal flame and a radiant monument that lives on in the hearts of those who cherish cinema in its truest form. Elizabeth Montgomery as Samantha Stevens. With her pure beauty and that mesmerizing nose twitch, Elizabeth Montgomery carved out an immortal Samantha Stevens, the gentle witch who used magic to nurture the simplest form of happiness. For 8 seasons of Bewitched, she was not merely a television star, but a familiar companion who brought warmth and hope into millions of homes. In the collective memory of audiences, Elizabeth became the very symbol of sweetness, a radiant rose blooming at the heart of Hollywood's golden era. Yet behind that brilliance lay a merciless sentence of fate, beginning with the suffocating relationship she endured with her powerful father, Robert Montgomery, a man who fiercely opposed her career and relentlessly criticized her passion for acting. This emotional fracture propelled her into a series of romantic tragedies across 4 marriages, culminating in the blood and tears union with actor Gig Young. From 1956 to 1963, Elizabeth suffered through domestic violence and her husband's uncontrollable drunken rages, turning what should have been a home into a living hell. The pain only deepened as she desperately attempted to shed the Samantha image through darker roles, such as The Legend of Lizzie Borden, 1975. But the cold reception from critics and the overwhelming shadow of her past slowly drained her spirit, leaving her exhausted and profoundly alone at the very peak of fame. All of those emotional wounds, however, were merely a prelude to the most brutal and heartbreaking chapter of her life, which unfolded in early 1995. After months of ignoring physical pain while dedicating herself to charitable work, Elizabeth was stunned by a death sentence: advanced, metastasized colon cancer. In just 8 short weeks after diagnosis, the disease ravaged her body with terrifying speed, stripping away every last reserve of strength from a woman once overflowing with vitality. On May 18, 1995, reduced to a frail figure weighing less than 40 kilograms, she made a heartbreaking decision: to leave the hospital and return to her home in Beverly Hills, choosing to face death in silence rather than allow the world to witness her physical decline. The cruelty of fate could not be more stark. On screen, Samantha could change the world with a single twitch of her nose, yet in real life, Elizabeth Montgomery lay there, alone and powerless, watching life slip away with each fractured breath. Elizabeth Montgomery passed away at the age of 62, leaving behind an immeasurable void in the hearts of her admirers. She departed while her talent still burned brightly, closing the final chapter of a life woven with tragedy, resilience, and quiet pride. Though her body has returned to dust, Samantha's smile endures, an immortal presence, a lasting legacy that continues to warm the souls of audiences across generations. Elizabeth's determined effort to shed the image of the sweet beloved witch and step into darker, more abrasive roles, such as the notorious murderer Lizzie Borden, sparked intense and divided debate. Some praised the move, seeing it as a bold declaration of artistic freedom and the courage of an actress refusing to remain trapped in a gilded cage of fame. Others argued that she was dismantling the brightest glory of her career in pursuit of unrealistic ambition. So, what do you think? Was this transformation a proud, groundbreaking leap or a costly mistake that sacrificed the public's affection? Share your view. Comment 1 if you support her choice, or 0 if you feel a sense of regret. Sandra Gould as Gladys Kravitz. Sandra Gould stepped into the role of the ever-watchful neighbor Gladys Kravitz beginning in Season 3, bringing a fresh and more flexible energy to the neighborhood's absurd and comical situations around the Stevens home. Having already left her mark in films such as The Story of Molly X, 1949, she infused the character with a uniquely loud, animated humor that helped sustain the appeal of one of television's most beloved supporting roles. Viewers remember her for her boundless energy, a lively piece that completed the magical mosaic of Bewitched. Behind the camera, however, the reality of Sandra's life unfolded like a melancholy score filled with tear-soaked rises and falls. The sorrow began in 1954 with the sudden death of her first husband, Larry Burns, leaving her to raise her son alone in the unforgiving world of Hollywood. At the same time, she carried the suffocating psychological burden of replacing the late Alice Pierce. From 1966 to 1971, Sandra endured relentless and often cruel comparisons from the public, forcing herself to smile on screen while her heart was weighed down by the stigma of being merely a replacement. As time passed, her career slowly receded into the shadows, transforming a woman once accustomed to the spotlight into a fading figure struggling to reclaim her place amid an increasingly indifferent era. The most devastating nightmare arrived in her later years, when she lost her second husband, director Hollingsworth Morse, in 1988, plunging her into profound and enduring loneliness. Another tragic turning point came in mid-1999, when her health collapsed entirely, forcing her to undergo a high-risk heart surgery in a desperate attempt to preserve her fragile life. Fate, however, delivered its final blow on July 20th, 1994. Just 3 days after leaving the operating room, a massive stroke stripped away the last of the aging artist's remaining strength. Heartbreakingly, Sandra passed away only 72 hours before what would have been her 83rd birthday, turning preparations for a final celebration into white funeral wreaths. The contrast between a Gladys Kravitz forever brimming with vitality and a weakened, solitary Sandra Gould lying in a Burbank hospital bed is a cruel truth that tightens the heart. Sandra Gould closed an 82-year journey marked by hardship and quiet endurance on a silent California afternoon. Though her life was shaped by a series of sacrifices made in the shadow of others, her devotion to her craft remains undeniable. That flame of passion continues to glow through every frame she left behind, preserving a gentle and lasting memory for all who once cherished the laughter she gave to the world. Paul Lynde as Uncle Arthur. Paul Lynde injected Bewitched with explosive vitality through the mischievous character of Uncle Arthur, unleashing laughter with razor-sharp sarcasm and a signature cackle that was unmistakably his own. Rising from New York nightclub stages before becoming the beating heart of Hollywood squares, he secured his place as a singular comedic genius. Audiences were captivated by his volatile energy, an enduring symbol of peak satire in 1970s Hollywood. Yet the real world of this comic sorcerer was a landscape of relentless inner turmoil, rooted in lifelong insecurity about his appearance and weight. Living in an era steeped in prejudice, Paul was forced to bury his true self and conceal his sexuality, wearing humor as a mask to hide profound loneliness. That repression drove him into severe alcoholism, gradually eroding self-control and straining the trust of colleagues. The wounds deepened in 1965 when he witnessed the death of his close friend James Bo Lewis, who fell from a hotel balcony before his eyes. The trauma haunted Paul forever, turning each televised smile into a desperate attempt to fend off the depression gnawing at his soul. The harshest turning point arrived in the early 1980s, a bleak period marked by professional decline and complete physical collapse. Trapped by Hollywood in diminishing supporting roles and terrified of being forgotten, Paul grew increasingly dependent on substances. On January 10, 1982, a massive heart attack struck him down in solitude inside his luxurious Beverly Hills home at just 55 years old. Most devastating of all, his body was discovered only days later when a friend forced entry after repeated attempts to reach him failed. The man who once warmed millions with laughter died alone in cold darkness, with no loved one beside him in his final hours. The cruel contrast between a radiant, boisterous Uncle Arthur and a solitary Paul Lynde, quietly awaiting death, is a truth that tightens the heart. Paul Lynde departed this world while his talent still burned brightly, closing a life woven with pride, brilliance, and deep sorrow. He left in unsettling silence, yet the applause he earned continues to echo through time. Paul's legacy is not only an endless cascade of laughter, but also a testament to the courage of an artist's soul, forever yearning to be loved, understood, and finally seen. Dick York as Darrin Stephens. With his witty delivery and irresistibly expressive face, Dick York brought to life an unforgettable Darrin Stephens, the mortal husband forever caught between reality and his wife's magical world. From 1964 to 1969, he was not only the heart of Bewitched, but also a familiar presence at dinner tables in millions of American homes. Audiences admired him for his perseverance and sincerity, embracing him as the ideal man of television's golden age. Yet behind the laughter on screen lay a living nightmare that began with a devastating spinal injury in 1959 on the set of They Came to Cordura. The damage permanently injured his vertebrae, turning every moment in front of the camera into an act of brutal self-torture. To keep working and support his family, Dick York was forced to rely on increasingly heavy doses of painkillers, unwittingly plunging himself into years of dependency and addiction to sedatives. The strain grew unbearable as he secretly leaned against walls or props just to stay upright, struggling to conceal his crumbling body from colleagues and the public eye. All remaining limits of endurance collapsed on a fateful afternoon in 1969, when Dick York suffered a violent seizure and collapsed on set, marking the most painful turning point of his life. Being forced to abandon the role at the height of its success, and watching Dick Sargent step in as his replacement, delivered a crushing blow to the pride of a devoted artist. For the next 18 months, he lay bedridden in desolation, abandoned by glamorous Hollywood, and reduced to such financial hardship that he survived on social assistance. Tragedy compounded tragedy when his long-standing habit of smoking, used as a coping mechanism for stress, led to severe emphysema, robbing him of the simple ability to breathe. In his final years, the once charismatic leading man had become a gaunt shadow of himself, tethered to an oxygen tank inside a modest home in Michigan, clinging to fragile life. Witnessing an icon of laughter reduced to battling for each breath in poverty is a harsh truth that leaves the heart aching. On February 20th, 1992, Dick York quietly passed away at the age of 63, bringing an end to a life marked by relentless pain. He departed with no titles or fortune left in his hands, yet he bequeathed a powerful legacy of compassion through a charitable foundation dedicated to helping the homeless. The gentle image of Darrin Stevens endures, an enduring note of grace, a timeless memory that rises above even the cruelest turns of fate. David White as Larry Tate. David White sculpted a razor-sharp Larry Tate, the pragmatic advertising executive who constantly maneuvered to please his clients throughout all 8 seasons of Bewitched. With his natural delivery and finely tuned comic rhythm, he became an indispensable piece of the show, embodying the volatile corporate world that existed alongside Samantha's enchanted family life. Audiences remember him as a symbol of professionalism, a familiar face that helped define the success of 1960s sitcom television. Yet the record of David White's real life is steeped in bitter, aching notes, beginning with a devastating loss just as his career was taking shape. In 1958, his young wife, Mary Welch, died suddenly from complications during pregnancy while carrying their second child, leaving him a widower and a single father overnight. For years, David compressed his grief into silence, taking on every supporting role he could, from stage productions to television, solely to provide the best possible life for his son, Jonathan. Loneliness slowly eroded his spirit as he performed lively, fast-paced scenes before the camera, only to return home to the quiet reality of a broken-hearted father raising a child alone. The most horrifying nightmare, the blow that utterly shattered David's will, arrived on December 21st, 1988, a date forever etched in sorrow. His only son, Jonathan White, was killed at the age of 33 in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. Having lost the sole emotional anchor he had devoted his life to protecting, David's world collapsed completely, plunging him into deep depression and total withdrawal from public life. In his final years, the once vibrant artist became a solitary figure, fading away inside a small home in North Hollywood, accompanied only by tear-stained mementos of his beloved son. On November 27, 1990, a heart already exhausted by compounded trauma finally gave out after a massive heart attack. The cruel contrast between a perpetually energetic Larry Tate on screen and a lonely, despairing David White awaiting death in darkness is a painful truth that leaves the soul shaken. David White passed away at the age of 74, closing the chapter on a life defined by devotion, sacrifice, and quiet artistry. Though he departed this world in profound solitude, his contributions to the craft remain enduring. He left behind not only laughter through the character of Larry Tate, but also a deeply human story of paternal love, a memory that continues to live on in the hearts of those who remember him. George Tobias as Abner Kravitz. George Tobias shaped a gentle, long-suffering Abner Kravitz, the soft-spoken husband who spent 7 seasons quietly trying to make peace with the eccentricities of his wife Gladys on Bewitched. Drawing on decades of experience from classic films such as Sergeant York, 1941, he delivered a calm, restrained performance that became a soothing counterbalance to the show's magical chaos. Admirers came to regard him as a master of supporting roles, a steadfast artist who poured sincerity and discipline into every frame he appeared in. Yet the real-life record of this man tells a far lonelier story, marked by years of unspoken hardship. At just 15, George was forced to abandon his childhood dreams and take on manual labor at the neighborhood playhouse to help his family survive financial hardship. Despite his solid acting ability, Hollywood confined him to background roles, never allowing him to taste the radiant glory of true stardom. That quiet professional frustration was compounded by a deeply personal reality. George never married. After portraying devoted husbands on screen, he returned night after night to 4 silent walls, no life partner, no children's laughter, slowly consumed by profound solitude as age and the industry's harsh indifference closed in. The deepest tragedy struck in the late 1970s when a merciless diagnosis of bladder cancer began to ravage his body. George endured prolonged treatments in pain, striving to preserve the last fragments of dignity of a once respected actor before passing away on February 27, 1980, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Yet the cruelest indignity unfolded after his death, in a shocking incident that stunned the public. While transporting his body to the morgue, the hearse carrying George Tobias was brazenly stolen. The thieves drove several blocks before realizing a respected actor's body lay in the back, then abandoned both the vehicle and his remains on a cold city street in panic. The contrast between the serene Abner Kravitz on screen and a George Tobias whose body was violated and left exposed is a brutal tragedy, one that stirs both outrage and sorrow. George Tobias passed away at the age of 78, closing a life devoted entirely to his craft, yet heavy with quiet bitterness. Though his final moments were overshadowed by a heartbreaking and extraordinary incident, his talent and professionalism remain a precious legacy. He left behind an irreplaceable void, and a powerful testament to pure devotion to art that endures beyond even the harshest turns of fate. Dick Sargent as Darrin Stevens. Dick Sargent entered the world of Bewitched with a calm, composed presence, bringing a fresh interpretation to the role of Darrin Stevens from seasons 6 through 8. Originally the first choice of director William Asher back in 1964, but fate intervened. He waited patiently for 5 long years before finally inheriting the role. In the hearts of fans, Sargent came to embody the image of a refined gentleman, striving to preserve the spirit of the series during its final years. Behind the restrained smile he wore before the camera, however, lay a life constrained by harsh prejudice and the crushing weight of his predecessor's legacy. When he assumed the role in 1969, Sargent was met with fierce backlash from loyal fans of Dick York, a reaction so intense that the show's ratings plunged by 13 places. The wound cut even deeper as he was forced to conceal his true identity for more than 4 decades in order to protect his career in an unforgiving Hollywood. Living behind the mask of a perfect family man, while his heart quietly bled from loneliness and the fear of rejection, turned his professional life into a silent contract of servitude to fame. The most devastating turning point came in 1989, when Dick Sargent received a death sentence in the form of prostate cancer. This brutal chapter not only eroded his physical strength, but also drained the spirit of an artist who had always prized dignity and composure. By 1991, when he realized his remaining time was measured in days, he made the courageous decision to publicly acknowledge his true identity, a choice filled with pride, yet soaked in tears. for the truth was only accepted when he was already standing at the edge of the abyss. During his final months at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, metastatic cancer left him completely immobile, his body reduced to a fragile, emaciated shell. The contrast between the energetic Darrin Stevens on screen and the motionless Dick Sargent, writhing in searing pain and isolation, is a cruel reality that tightens the heart. He spent a lifetime performing as someone else, only to live as his true self in his final, broken breaths. On July 8, 1994, Dick Sargent passed away at the age of 64, bringing to a close a life marked by restraint, sacrifice, and quiet endurance. Though he left this world in the stillness of a hospital room, his final act of courage became a guiding light for others who shared his struggle. Sargent's legacy extends beyond classic television episodes. It stands as a testament to the cost of freedom, paid for with a lifetime of silence. Casey Rogers as Louise Tate. Casey Rogers fully embodied the role of Louise Tate, the intelligent, sharp-witted wife of advertising boss Larry Tate, forming a perfectly balanced duo from Season 3 of Bewitched. Before entering the world of witches, she had already astonished audiences with tough, edgy roles under the direction of Alfred Hitchcock. Viewers remember her as a versatile performer, a woman of confidence and rare resolve, the unmistakable bearing of a true Hollywood leading lady. Yet the reality of Casey Rogers' life was a relentless series of sacrifices of identity in exchange for survival in the entertainment industry. It began when the studio stripped her of her birth name, Kathleen Rogers, replacing it with the coldly manufactured screen name Laura Elliott, forcing her to live for years under an identity that felt chuja to her own soul. The torment deepened as she was repeatedly typecast as manipulative or calculating women, leading the public to develop prejudice and even hostility toward her off-screen. When she took over the role of Louise Tate in 1966 from Irene Vernon, Casey once again found herself labeled a replacement, compelled to endure intense scrutiny and prove her worth within a cast already bound by familiarity. The true storm descended in the latter half of her life when a vicious throat cancer struck, attacking her voice, the most precious instrument of her craft. For a long period, Casey endured brutal radiation treatments that eroded both her beauty and vitality through relentless pain. The most devastating turning point came when sudden cardiac arrest triggered a catastrophic stroke, transforming a woman once addicted to speed, who had raced fearlessly across off-road tracks, into a fragile figure, paralyzed in a hospital bed. Losing both speech and physical freedom became a cruel psychological sentence, forcing her to spend her final years in absolute helplessness. On July 6, 2006, in Los Angeles, she passed into eternity at the age of 80. The brutal contrast between a sharp, agile Louise Tate on screen and a silent, solitary Casey Rogers struggling for breath in the darkness of a hospital room is a heartbreaking truth that leaves anyone shaken. Casey Rogers departed this world after a long and courageous battle with illness. She closed her eyes when the stage lights had long since dimmed, yet her fiery spirit and enduring performances remain a treasured legacy. The image of the strong-willed woman with resolute eyes lives on, an enduring source of inspiration for perseverance across generations. Alice Pierce as Gladys Kravitz. Alice Pierce sent millions of television viewers into fits of laughter with her portrayal of the ever-snooping neighbor Gladys Kravitz, wide-eyed and hilariously suspicious. Her singular charm and sharp, satirical delivery turned Gladys's constant spying on the Stevens household into an essential hallmark of Bewitched. Audiences embraced her as a refreshing emotional tonic, a rare comedic talent who transformed perceived physical imperfections into an art form capable of winning every heart. Yet the world is rarely kind or complete, and the life of this gifted comedian was shadowed early by chilling undertones of sorrow. At the start of her career, Alice faced Hollywood's cold indifference due to her unconventional appearance, a rejection that quietly scarred her spirit. That pain deepened in 1956, when her beloved husband, composer John Rocks, died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving her engulfed in loneliness at just 39 years old. The cruelest blow came in 1964, just before filming began on the show's first season, when Alice received a death sentence: advanced ovarian cancer. Rather than surrender, she chose to conceal the diagnosis from the entire cast and crew, silently enduring excruciating pain so she could continue facing the camera with a radiant smile. The most brutal and heartbreaking phase arrived in late 1965, as the disease began to ravage her body with merciless force. Throughout the second season, while audiences laughed uncontrollably at Gladys's antics, Alice was summoning every ounce of inner strength simply to withstand physical collapse. Viewers grew alarmed as her face became gaunt, and her weight dropped dramatically, so severely that even makeup could no longer hide the presence of death drawing near. In the early months of 1966, as the cancer spread aggressively, Alice was forced to leave the set in profound sorrow. She spent her final days bedridden at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where physical agony intertwined with the emotional torment of knowing she could not complete the role that defined her career. On March 3, 1966, Alice Pierce passed away at the age of just 48, precisely as her career reached its highest point. The stark contrast between the boisterous Gladys Kravitz on screen and an Alice Pierce quietly fading into silence is a devastating truth that leaves the heart heavy. Alice Pierce departed when the rose of fame was in full bloom, leaving her colleagues in stunned disbelief. Only months after her passing, she was posthumously honored with the prestigious Emmy Award in recognition of her extraordinary dedication. Though her physical form has vanished, the optimism and laughter she gave to the world endure, a treasured memory and a lasting monument to unwavering devotion to her craft until the very final moment. Erin Murphy as Tabitha Stevens. Erin Murphy appeared on screen like a little angel with mischievous eyes, portraying Adam Stevens, the witch-born son of Samantha. Joining the later seasons of Bewitched, he quickly won the affection of millions with his natural charm. Many viewers placed great hopes on the young boy, seeing him as a promising seed destined to blossom into a major talent of world cinema. Yet Erin's journey into adulthood became a prolonged struggle to escape the towering shadow of his own childhood fame. After the series ended in 1972, instead of receiving new scripts and opportunities, he faced Hollywood's ruthless rejection as puberty altered his appearance. The pain deepened when he realized he was remembered only as the Stevens child, triggering a severe identity crisis that followed him throughout his teenage years. Unable to find a place in Hollywood after such early glory, Erin drifted into isolation, gradually distancing himself from friends and slipping into mild depression in his early 20s. The cruelest blow came in the late 1990s, when his physical health collapsed under the combined weight of a destructive lifestyle and long-standing career disappointment. Erin silently endured excruciating pain from a serious illness affecting his digestive system and liver, concealing his condition even from the few remaining admirers who still remembered him. On July 12, 1999, the ill-fated former child star passed away in California at just 40 years old, an age meant to be the brightest chapter of life. His death unfolded in chilling silence. No headlines, no media farewell, no public tribute. The harsh contrast between the radiant, magical little Adam of the past and a lonely, middle-aged man helplessly battling death in a hospital bed is a heartbreaking reality that leaves the heart heavy. Erin Murphy left this world with dreams of a brilliant career still unfinished. He passed away at a time when the world had almost completely forgotten the witch's son. Yet the black and white frames of young Adam remain a cherished memory for audiences. His death leaves behind a quiet, sorrowful pause, a haunting reminder of the unforgiving price of early fame in Hollywood. Marion Lorne as Aunt Clara. Marion Lorne captured viewers' hearts as Aunt Clara, a forgetful, endearingly clumsy elderly witch, famous for her odd collection of doorknobs and spells that rarely went as planned. Beginning her career on the Broadway stage as early as 1905, she brought a gentle, childlike warmth to her performances, turning Clara into a symbol of kindness and quiet charm. Audiences embraced her as a loving grandmother figure, a deeply nostalgic presence within the enchanted world of Bewitched. Behind Aunt Clara's innocent facade, however, lay a life marked by hardship and quiet sacrifice. Burdened by lifelong insecurity over her unconventional looks, Marion was rarely offered leading roles during her youth. True tragedy struck in 1944 with the sudden death of her beloved husband, playwright Walter C. Hackett. His passing not only shattered her emotional foundation, but also forced her to close the Whitehall Theatre in London and return to the United States penniless in her later years. In her final seasons on set, Marion silently battled the frailty of an aging body. Frequent exhaustion and persistent shortness of breath plagued her, yet she pushed herself to remain agile before the camera, determined not to slow the production or burden her colleagues. The most devastating blow came on May 9, 1968, just 10 days before filming was set to begin for the 5th season. A massive heart attack struck the elderly actress in her modest Manhattan apartment, ending her life while her artistic plans remained unfinished. The cruelty of fate deepened months later, when Marion Lorne was posthumously announced as the winner of the Emmy Award for Outstanding Supporting Actress, the pinnacle of recognition she had longed for through more than 60 years of devotion. Tragically, the person who accepted the award was not the gentle woman with the warm smile, but a representative standing on her behalf amid a tear-filled auditorium. The contrast between a lively Aunt Clara on screen and a Marion Lorne already laid to rest just before her moment of triumph is a heartbreaking truth, one that aches for an artist who spun silk until her final breath, yet missed a lifetime of fulfillment by mere moments. Marion Lorne's earthly journey ended at the age of 84, leaving behind immeasurable sorrow among colleagues and millions of admirers. She departed just as the brightest spotlight finally found her, but it was her tireless devotion that made her name eternal. Though her physical form has faded into dust, the image of Aunt Clara and that tender, reassuring smile remains a cherished memory, a lasting monument to unwavering love for the craft in the history of television. Bernard Fox as Dr. Bombay. Bernard Fox left a lasting impression as Dr. Bombay, the witty witch doctor known for his eccentric treatments and one-of-a-kind disguises. Born into a long-established theatrical family, he entered the world of entertainment at just 18 months old, revealing an innate gift for guiding audience emotions from an early age. In the public eye, Bernard embodied light-hearted charm, a joyful presence who swept away troubles within the magical universe of Bewitched. Yet the real-life portrait of this gifted artist was shaded with somber tones, beginning with a childhood sacrificed to survival when he was forced to shoulder backstage responsibilities at a theater at just 14. Those early burdens were deepened by lasting psychological scars from the ravages of war. Bernard served in the Royal Navy throughout World War II and later during the Korean War, witnessing bloodshed and the brutal reality of combat while still in his 20s. Confronting death and destruction so directly left him with lifelong reflections on the fragility of human existence. Bittersweet still, his Hollywood career proved far from smooth. producers repeatedly confined him to the archetype of the proper English gentleman, burying his longing for psychologically demanding roles beneath quiet disappointment. The cruelest chapter unfolded in his later years, as Bernard was forced to bid farewell, one by one, to close companions such as Elizabeth Montgomery and Dick Sargent. Becoming the last remaining witness to a fading golden era was a mental torment that plunged him into profound isolation. Another strange fixation lingered in his mind: his repeated connection to the Titanic tragedy, portrayed in both A Night to Remember, 1958, and James Cameron's epic Titanic, 1997. True hardship arrived when heart failure began to ravage his body, transforming a once energetic man into a fragile figure, struggling for breath within the dim stillness of Valley Presbyterian Medical Center. On December 14, 2016, Bernard Fox passed away at the age of 89 after enduring relentless chest pains. The cruel contrast between a Dr. Bombay who could magically heal all wounds and a helpless Bernard Fox lying in silence, awaiting death in a hospital room, is a sorrowful truth that leaves admirers deeply shaken. Bernard Fox closed a journey spanning nearly a century, leaving behind immeasurable loss for all who cherished his refined performances. He departed after the era of witches had fully drawn to a close, yet the flame of passion he ignited continues to shine. Though his physical form has faded into nothingness, the mischievous smile of Dr. Bombay remains vividly alive, a graceful note in the nostalgic love song of the 1960s. The story of the Bewitched cast concludes like a symphony steeped in tragic grandeur, where the witches' smiles on screen were purchased with tears and unbearable pain off camera. They burned brightly beneath the studio lights to offer the world moments of joy and wonder, then quietly retreated into the shadows, with wounds fate would never fully heal. Amid all that brilliance and heartbreak, whose story will you remember most? Subscribe to join us as we continue to uncover the haunting truths hidden behind Hollywood's velvet curtain.